Hi, folks. My name is Bethany Benz Whittington. I am a PCUSA pastor and teacher, and this is a current events series that I do through my educational ministry, Sacred Calls. I really like to talk about the things that are happening in our world and helping people to think theologically about how we respond. It's like a mini sermon almost, but I will say things your pastor might not. So let's get started. Today is October the 11th, 2023, and if you guessed that we are talking about Israel and Palestine, you are correct. There's a lot to cover here, so we may go a bit longer than usual, but I want you to have as much discussion time as possible, so I promise to try and rein myself in. Before we jump in, pause the video and read together Amos 5:18 through 25. Then come back and we'll go. So, the events of last weekend, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel, shocked the world. I am not sure why. Israel and Palestine have been at war with each other for almost 75 years. No ceasefire has ever lasted between them because no ceasefire, no peace negotiation, no compromise between groups is ever able to get at the root of the issue. Neither group will cede ground on Jerusalem. Now, I'm actually not going to go into all of the history of Israel and Palestine because, though relevant, when we do, we tend to fall into a posture of blame. He said, she said, they did this, they did that. There is lots and lots of blame to go around. Some people will blame Israel for stealing Palestinian Arab land in the late 40s. Before that, Arab societies called any Jewish goods undesirable because they might lead to Zionist ideals being implemented. We could go back and back and back in history for as long as history is written down. This particular area of the world is under siege and claimed by many, many people groups, and for multiple reasons. Not only does it have vast religious significance, it is the birthplace of all humanity. People feel strongly about this land, particularly and especially Jerusalem, a deeply holy site for multiple religions. Now, if you're interested, there's a really great, really brief explainer of all of this on an episode of The West Wing in one of its later seasons. It focuses on Jerusalem as the crux of the issue and everyone's unwillingness to cede any ground when it comes to who controls it. Now, what's so striking in this episode, though, is they do this visual juxtaposition of religious observances. The Israelis pause for Shabbat while the Palestinians go for evening prayer. That Friday evening, everyone pauses. They're at a peace summit, and everyone pauses to go to their separate corners and do the thing that they believe God is calling them to do, their rituals of faith. Which brings us to this passage from Amos. God, through the prophet Amos, says, I actually hate it that you continue to observe all your religious rituals when the only ritual that really matters to me is that you act justly towards people. It's one of those passages in scripture that makes no bones about how God feels in a particular moment. And in this moment, God is pissed. And so God says to them, do not come to me with your worship and your sacrifices and then go out and act with harm and oppression and violence towards others. I do not like that. That's the context here. Amos walks into the northern kingdom of ancient Israel and says, look at all the countries around you. They are no good. They treat people with disdain. And the people of the northern kingdom are listening and they're like, yeah, they suck. And then Amos turns the tables on them and says, you too. That is, of course, when they stop listening and decide to threaten him with death if he doesn't leave. It is proving his point, as it were. Basically, it's not okay to only observe bits and pieces of your religion. God, the God of Christians, Muslims, and Jews, calls upon us all to act justly and righteously, which brings us back to today. Neither the Israeli government nor Hamas is acting justly nor righteously. Now, I, as a 21st century Christian, will not presume to know or understand all of the complexities and nuances involved in this decades and millennia long conflict, especially because I am a member of the religion that entered that region around the turn of the last millennia and began slaughtering Jews and Muslims. I am also a member of the religion who has blamed Jews for killing Jesus and used that to justify the oppression and murder of Jews ever since. These things are not of God. What I do know is that none of our three religions truly condone violence of any sort. So we all three have been and are guilty of atrocities in the name of God that make God weep. And as we can see from Amos, fill God with righteous rage, understandably. Now, here's where I personally get caught up, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this as well. When my husband and I were talking about this most recent attack a few nights ago, we wondered together about what came before. He looked at me while reading the news and said, nearly 1,000 Israelis are either dead or captive. And I just shook my head and said, how many Palestinians have been killed or imprisoned this week or in the last 10 years? And friends, we don't know because it very, very rarely gets reported on. And that is a problem. We have this idealized view of Israel and insist that they are the victims always and are allowed to defend themselves, which, of course, they are. But I would argue that there are victims across the board. And Palestine is also allowed to defend themselves. I think the biggest issue is that we always come down on the side of Israel no matter what, no matter how viciously they act toward Palestinians. And when Palestinians suffer, we seem not to care, or we say they deserve it for attacking Israel. We collectively only mourn dead Israelis. I fully believe that if Jews want to have a state of Israel, then they should. Period. The end. I also believe if Muslims want to have a state of Palestine, then they also should. But the world around me doesn't seem to agree. And I struggle with that because in the end, we are all human people created by God in God's image. And in all three religions, God calls upon the faithful to treat the other, the foreigner, the stranger, with compassion and mercy. But as a Reformed Christian, I also believe deeply in total depravity. And I know that given the opportunity, we will fail to live up to that high calling. And we will do it in the name of faith, in the name of God. So again, the issue is complex and deeply nuanced, with millennia of history contributing to the current ongoing destruction. It behooves us to study it, to understand it, to ask questions. But above all, it is our calling, our specific Christian calling, to see the image of God in all people and to heed that calling, to let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. May it be so. So there's a discussion guide for you to dive into this issue together. Again, I know that this is a really big, hard one, but we have to try, right? So blessings upon your discussion, and I will see you next week.